Before I met the Dharma, literature and theater were my refuge. It was the main reason why I even went to school, and for many years, that's what I spent a lot of time studying, practicing, discussing, and eventually teaching for a brief period of time. And during Geshe Yeshe Tapke's course in October on the Four Noble Truths, I found my mind wandering back to poems that I had studied many years ago, which was kind of curious. And after thinking about it for some time, I think it's because poetry was what gave me my first glimpse into the First Noble Truth, the truth of dukkha, or unsatisfactoriness. And more specifically, poetry gave me a sense of the dukkha of dukkha, or gross mental and physical suffering, right? And how that applies to every human being and every being that's sentient. And as most of you might be aware, there are 3 types of dukkha. So in the future weeks, I will talk about the catalysts that helped me to recognize those in my own experience as well. But first, today, poetry as a door to the dukkha of dukkha. I would like to share with you one of the poems that I studied in 9th grade, which was written in 1918 during the First World War. And before I do that, I think I have to give what's called a trigger warning. Earlier this year, I communicated with an old friend who teaches playwriting at college. He wanted very much to come visit the Abbey, but that's not possible. And he told me that there's been a movement to put a trigger warning on college readings to alert students if the work contains violent or potentially distressing material. And he was kind of frustrated, to be honest, because you have to put a trigger warning on just about every classic play, starting with the Greeks. So, warning, this poem contains dukkha. And the title is Dulce e Decorum Est by Wilfred Owen. Bent double, like old beggars under sacks, knock-kneed, coughing like hags we cursed through sludge, till on the haunting flares we turned our backs, and towards our distant rest began to trudge. Men marched asleep. Many had lost their boots but limped on, bloodshot. All went lame, all blind, drunk with fatigue, deaf even to the hoots of gas shells dropping softly behind. Gas, gas, quick boys, an ecstasy of fumbling, fitting the clumsy helmets just in time. But someone still was yelling out and stumbling, and floundering like a man in fire or lime. Dim through the misty panes and thick green light, as under a green sea, I saw him drowning. In all my dreams before my helpless sight, he plunges at me, guttering, choking, drowning. If in some smothering dreams you too could pace behind the wagon that we flung him in, and watch the white eyes writhing in his hanging face like a devil's sick of sin, if you could hear at every jolt the blood come gargling from the froth-corrupted lungs, obscene as cancer, bitter as the cut of vile, incurable sores on innocent tongues, my friend, you would not tell with such high zest to children ardent for some desperate glory the old lie, dulce e decorum est pro patria mori. So the closing lines in Latin are a quote from a poem by the Roman poet Horace, and they mean, "It is sweet and fitting to die for one's country." So there we were, 14 years old, sheltered Singaporean school children, bearing witness to what had happened to millions of teenage boys just a few years older than us in a terrible war. And sitting there, I wondered, what do we do now? Cry? Scream? Observe a minute of silence? None of the above. The teacher said, this poem is made up of 2 sonnets. One is a Petrarchan sonnet and the other is an English sonnet. This is a rhyme scheme. This is how you scan the meter. Da-dum, 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 and on and on and on. And you have to wonder, right, after a poem like this is published, how can people still send children into war? But it's happened. Yeah, after the First World War, there was a second, and on and on and on to this very day. So to quote another of my favorite poets, Auden, W.H. Auden, he said, "Poetry makes nothing happen. It survives." So for years, I was obsessed with literature written after the First and Second World War. I think I was searching to see if there might be answers about why we make each other suffer. and how to prevent that. But I didn't really find one. Bertolt Brecht wrote in exile, "In the dark times, will there also be singing? Yes, there will also be singing about the dark times." And I would say that's where literature stopped for me. It gave me a glimpse into the First Noble Truth, and I got stuck. By the time I was in my 20s, even though I presented as very positive and optimistic, inside I had a lot of rage, cynicism, and despair. I remember once looking at photos of the G8 conference with some friends, and it just came out of my mouth. I said, someone should set off a bomb there. Yeah, like punish these privileged people kind of thought, which is a really scary place to be mentally. So what I find so precious in about the Dharma is that the Buddha didn't stop with the First Noble Truth. He taught the second, the third, and the fourth as well. So yes, there is dukkha, we have to recognize it, and it has causes, the causes can be seized, and there is a path to that cessation. And I have found that teaching to be so incredibly helpful and hopeful. So I want to read you a passage by Bhikkhu Bodhi on the Four Noble Truths that really resonated with me, and it's from one of the texts assigned in our Sravasti Abbey Friends Education program. So here Bhikkhu Bodhi writes, "The teaching given by the Buddha in the First Noble Truth often tends to arouse a certain degree of emotional resistance. This gives rise to misunderstanding, sometimes false charges of Buddha is a pessimist, a negativist, one who only sees the dark side of things. However, we have to understand the Buddha's purpose in teaching the First Noble Truth. The Buddha's aim in this whole Dharma is to lead us to liberation, to lead us out of an unsatisfactory situation. And the way to liberation lies through correct knowledge, through seeing and understanding our existence as it is. So in coming to the Dharma, we have to come with an open mind, ready to look at things objectively, to see them as they are, knowing and seeing things as they are." So he goes on to say how that takes a lot of effort because it's hard to, confront dukkha. So he mentions here, on the larger scale, we put old people off into homes for the aged. We don't want to see old age. Sick people are put off into hospitals. And if we have to go to the hospital, we go reluctantly. The dead are embalmed and covered over with nice flowers, put into very nice tombs. Poverty and war we shut off into the little corners of our mind. We sit comfortably looking at nice, pleasant, cozy, comfortable things. We're driven basically by an innate desire for pleasure. So reflecting on these, what Bhikkhu Bodhi wrote, I guess literature, especially the literature of witness, can be a beginning. Yeah, it can draw attention to dukkha. It can put the spotlight on what society doesn't want to witness, to speak, and to remember what is unspeakable. Auden did continue to say in that poem that I'm quoting from, poetry is a way of happening, a mouth. Or as one of my playwriting professors who wrote extensively about genocide and horrors of war, he said the space between speech and silence is song. So instead of, falling into the silence of trauma, you can sing about what is unspeakable. But still, I am deeply grateful to the Buddha, who doesn't only sing about dark times. He sings about their causes, their cessation, and the path to that cessation for ourselves and for all sentient beings.